Joining me now is Max Burns. He's a Democratic strategist, columnist with the Daily Beast. Max, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Our pleasure. Your recent article in Business Insider, you wrote that Trump's latest COVID-19 relief proposal is just another tax cut for the wealthy in disguise. I don't think that's going to come as a shock to many in this audience, but could you unpack a little bit of that and let us have a kind of a conversation about how we can understand just how this supposed policy is going to help people when it's actually not?
Yeah, absolutely. Right now, as almost everyone knows or is personally affected by, there are about 30 million people out of work who have been dependent on this pandemic unemployment assistance, extra $600 a week in their paycheck. Now, it's rent day today. Unfortunately, there hasn't been a COVID stimulus payment in weeks from Washington, despite Republican pledges to get that out to people before the end of August. In the meantime, they've been working almost exclusively on forcing through a payroll tax cut that does nothing for people who are unemployed, but does a great deal for some of Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago members and his political donors.
So tell us exactly, because this is something that they spin all the time, right? They're so eager to say a payroll tax cut, and then they label it as something that's going to help workers. But how is it going to help workers, if at all? And then show us how it's going to help donors and the wealthy, those that support Donald Trump.
Well, there's very little in this for people who are unemployed because, as you know, as should be common sense, unemployed people don't benefit from a payroll tax cut at all, since they don't have jobs. How this helps large businesses is it allows them to defer the taxes they would normally have to pay until next year or 2022. And that's one of the big lies of this whole debate, is that this isn't even really a tax cut. You're going to have to pay all of this money back to the government at some point. Trump is just hoping by that point you've forgotten who put you in this position.
You say that the meager unemployment boost to the payroll tax cut do little for actual working Americans and mostly to help the wealthy, which you just unpacked. What I'm interested in, though, is how we get around that talking point, because it seems to be something that is extremely effective in controlling the narrative. What you've explained makes sense to everybody. But as we get it into the media conversation, it kind of sticks. This is what Donald Trump said, and this is what circulates in the media ecosystem. How do we get around that talking point and help people to understand the propaganda that's being played on us?
This is something, unlike social issues, that actually has a timer on it. You can talk a big game and spin this and say this is a blue state problem. You can promise paychecks to people in the mail. But when those checks don't arrive, they're not going to care how you spin it. They're just going to ask where their money is. Mm-hmm. Now, in the meantime, Democrats and anyone who's been affected by this needs to actually get out and counter these narratives among friends and relatives. We see so often that the most persuasive voices are the people who have been affected by this. And when you see a family that has to choose this month between paying rent or feeding their kids, what Donald Trump says from his country club doesn't have quite the same punch.
Yeah. In terms of what we actually can do then, right? So the Democrats have control of the House, which is not enough to get a bill all the way through into a law. But what can be done in terms of the Democratic Party? What should they be doing differently? It does become a little frustrating, especially from a commentary perspective, when you see these narratives being pervasive from Donald Trump, and then no one is countering those narratives like you mentioned. But in addition to countering narratives, what can they strategically do in terms of the House, the powers that they have in the House, that could either bring light to this situation or move the ball forward in terms of getting something for the people?
So there was actually a hearing just today with Steve Mnuchin on Capitol Hill, where he was discussing the importance of getting to a deal on COVID insurance and COVID payments for out-of-work families. Unfortunately, he didn't actually provide any roadmap for how to do that. So it's clear that this is going to be on Democrats. Now, there's been a bill sitting on Mitch McConnell's desk for months now to provide sustained monthly payments to Americans that don't need to be the subject of a political debate every 30 days. It's going to be equally on members of Congress to force that issue, but also on voters and regular people to force their members of Congress to take this seriously. And I think if we do that, then we'll start to see the Democrats really say there's no business to be done in Congress until we address the problems facing out of work Americans.
Yeah. So are you saying that isn't that something the Democrats could do anyway? Isn't that something that they should be doing, right? Shouldn't they bring everything to a halt? Because you just said, like, today is the first of the month, and we really need the people in power to leverage that power. So what's holding them up? Is it that they simply need pressure from us, or could they not just take the lead and grind everything to a halt until we do something for the people?
To some extent, I think there is a problem of Capitol Hill Democrats and the sort of insider media that enables that bubble following Trump on whatever controversy he's doing now. And that's to the detriment of people who really need their members of Congress to focus on the issue of making sure they can stay in their home. Now, the way we get that is direct action. There is no substitute for writing or calling your member of Congress and making sure that you're being loud about the issues that matter to you. That works. It has worked in the past. And if this is any evidence, the Republicans will cave as soon as there's the smallest amount of public pressure.
That's interesting. So let's talk about those 30 million people who are unemployed. And today, a lot of them are having to make decisions in terms of food or rent, and there an increase in homelessness. Is there how can we have any expectation of them to participate politically like you just described? Obviously, there's those of us who are in better positions who could take it up and do it on their behalf. But isn't there a disconnect between the real world people who are struggling right now and the halls of power and all of the different machinations that we would go through in order to get them into action? Aren't the people who are suffering, aren't they already tied down with simply surviving?
It's a difficult place to be in this country, no doubt. It's National Suicide Prevention Month this month, and it should be said that a lot of these people are struggling very hard. And it is a testament to how committed they are that activists have formed things like extendpua.org to rally unemployed people together to get this done. Because this is not regular unemployment. This is something that may be going on well into next year. And when most Americans have less than $500 to spare for an emergency, you can't ask them to just sit around and wait for Congress to take it seriously. We have to fill the streets until we can fill the polling places in November.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. What can you speak to in terms of moratoriums on evictions, moratoriums on foreclosures? Is there anything that can be done from a federal level to actually help people in the middle of evictions?
There is. Unfortunately, we're only taking half measures. Something Donald Trump passed today through his desk was an executive order allegedly ending evictions through the end of the year. Now, if you read it carefully, it doesn't actually ban evictions. It just says that once that moratorium window is closed, you're responsible for paying all the rent you didn't pay in the months that moratorium was in place. What we need is the president to stop legislating from the Oval Office, go to Congress and pass a durable bill that actually ends the threat of eviction through this crisis.
Let's say that nothing gets done through November. What is the most optimistic, real timeline to expect relief in a Biden administration? Inauguration, first 100 days. When can we expect some type of financial relief for all of these hurting people if nothing happens during the Trump administration?
I think Joe Biden has made it really clear that this is one of his 100 days, even first 2 weeks principles of getting help to these people who have been so connected to him and who he's built his career representing. Now, that's going to be a great first step. But Joe Biden's also moved a bit to the left in saying we also need to address the root causes of unemployment, the root causes of pay inequality, to make sure that we don't have to do anything like this ever again.
Speak to that a little. We only have about 60 seconds left, but speak to that specific policy. Like, what is he planning to do to address the underlying causes?
Now, Joe Biden has so far said that he would immediately work with Congress to pass a more substantial coronavirus supplemental assistance for working families, that he would take off the table things like tax cuts for the wealthy and use that money to make sure families who are now facing having to send their kids back to school or have them home have the resources to do that. And beyond that, there's a whole host of great progressive ideas in Congress about how we make this system less susceptible to the shocks we're seeing now.
I think that would come as a surprise to some of our listeners that Joe Biden has some progressive policies in there, economic policies. I wish we had more time to explore it because I think that is extremely important. But Max, thank you so much for joining us. This is Max Burns, Democratic strategist, columnist with the Daily Beast. And his latest piece is in Business Insider. Trump's latest COVID-19 relief proposal is just another tax cut for the wealthy in disguise. Max, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
On the go? Don't worry, we got you covered. You can still listen to TYT at our new podcast network. Find us on Apple Podcasts, the Google Play Store, or at tyt.com/podcast.